We're going to build something brand new, a web application with Cursor AI, which is an IDE that uses a bunch of AI to help you write code. And in fact, in our case, what we're going to do a little bit special is we're going to try to get it to write essentially the whole thing. Now, let me show you what the application is going to look like first. Okay, so this is our finished application. It's going to be a web application that uses the YouTube API, allows you to put in a channel name, search for a channel, and select the different videos that have recently recorded off of that channel, and then be able to click a button and watch those videos in another window. That's going to basically be the application that we use or build. And before we get to that, I want to describe one little thing that is a little bit different. I'm going to be starting from a template. I'll show you in a second, getting started with that. You can type in the exact same command and start from the exact same location, which sets up just kind of a functional working environment, a simple application that comes up and running, and it has a couple frameworks in it. It does not have the YouTube API. It doesn't have anything specific to this application. So we're still going to do all of that and let Cursor kind of tell us how to do it or do it itself. But this template application I find useful. It's kind of the standard starting place for my toy box applications. It makes it very easy to judge how good Cursor was at building specific things because it had the same starting point. It's super easy to get started with. It's a single command. You can use it as well. Just follow along. But I do talk about it maybe ad nauseum in the demo here. But really, the interesting thing that you're going to see is this was very few interactions with Cursor to get to that application. It's becoming very sophisticated. It does have some moments later in the life cycle of developing an application that get difficult. We won't necessarily bump into those. This is not quite a sophisticated enough application, but I do describe another application that I recently built with Cursor and how it got a little bit harder going forward because of some of the ways that Cursor deals with files. And in fact, I have in this little template a few files. I describe them all. None of this is special, that help with those problems that Cursor creates to begin with. So dive in, kind of follow through. You can certainly follow along or you can just watch, but it is super easy. There's a couple tips, a couple simple fun tricks to make things a lot faster. In fact, here's a hint. Talk to Cursor, don't type to Cursor. That's the number one hint. If you take anything away, turn on dictation and start talking to Cursor. You'll get so much more out of it than you might imagine. So in any case, let's dive in. It's long enough going through the video itself. I do kind of jump cut through a little bit, but let's take a look. Okay, so here we are looking at Cursor. I've opened Cursor itself up. If we flip over the Cursor page, you can just go out to cursor.com and download Cursor. We've opened Cursor and I'm going to open a new project. And in this case, I'm just going to go to our code folder. I'm going to create a new folder. And this, again, I'm starting cold. This is just going to be from a completely empty folder, the YouTube channeler for no reason. And I'm going to say open. And so that's going to become the folder. It's an empty folder here in Cursor to give you brief orientation. On the left will be files of the application. On the right, when it pops out, will be our Cursor AI elements. And at the bottom is kind of the terminal window, the shell window down at the bottom. So another thing I'm going to show you is I am just going to use, as I said earlier, I'm just going to use a very simple starter template that I use with a simple little function that takes that template off the internet, checks it out, takes Git out of it so that you kind of own it. It renames it and owns it locally as starter Next.js simple, but the command, you don't need to necessarily come to this project at all. Don't worry about that. The only command you need here is this command. So npx is kind of a npm command that allows you to execute something locally. It does a temporary checkout of something and runs that project essentially. So I've written a little make mine function in npm that allows it to kind of go check out a project, pull it down locally, put it into a folder if you want to name a folder, and then take the GitHub repository essentially, and the whole Git repository in fact out of it and do a little renaming. It's very, very simple. But in any case, what we're going to do is we're going to just take this part of this command. I'm going to leave off the the project name because we've already created a folder, and say, okay, so we need to open up shell. The shell, when you open it up here, terminal, will open up in the folder that we've created. So we're going to want to paste that in and put a dot. And so all we're really saying is run this command here. That's kind of what this dot means in shell, rather than giving it a file name. If I gave it, or a folder name. If I gave it a folder name, it would create that folder first and do everything within there, but this just does it locally. And it really doesn't take long. Clones it, checks it out. Now we're done. npm install. And all that's going to do is go through the package file that it finds in the project that we checked out and install all the parts. That's all. So this node modules folder is really largely what showed up. And then we will do npm run dev. And when we do that, it starts a server with this project in place. Okay, here we are. All I've done is I've pulled a browser window next to the editor that we were looking at, because we'll be using those two a lot next to one another. So I just thought I'd pull them next to each other here. And now localhost 3000, if I command click this, it'll load in our browser over here. And so this on the left side over here is the sample application that's running from all of this. This is what checks out when you check it out. And it's just a sample playground system that shows you that it is running and it is a functional system, just to kind of give you an idea of what you can change. It gives you a little information about the styles down here. Won't go into that now. I think hopefully a lot of what's in this project Cursor will take care of, and we won't necessarily need to know a lot about this, but this is the playground that we're going to be working in. So as I tell it things like, let's get rid of the front page, this is the front page, or we don't need the animal game anymore. If you'll notice up in here in source, you'll see this thing called animal game. That's what's running that. So those kinds of things are what we're going to move into next as we start talking to this. The goal here is for you to realize you really don't need to know a lot of what's going on here to be able to move forward with Cursor. It's really important to understand that Cursor's doing a lot for us. Hopefully almost everything we write here will be through Cursor itself and not something that you need to have awareness of. However, as things get more sophisticated, your knowledge is important. Your awareness of what's going on in these projects really is important. That can't be understated. And it will be for the foreseeable future. There will be a time that you just don't need that level of sophistication, and these agents will take care of it all. But for a while, as we get better and better at this, you really will be benefited by kind of understanding the moving parts. At the very least, as it starts laying things down, if you don't know much, you can ask questions of the system itself, of Cursor itself. And I'll show you an example of that. But so let's look into the package file. Let's pretend that we don't understand what Chakra UI is. I can copy this, open up this Cursor panel over here, go to chat and say, tell me about Chakra UI. And so this is just a chat panel. It has reference to the files that you have open and your project at large. And it has the ability to kind of make changes for you. You'll see a bunch of these will come with the ability to apply it to different files or make these changes, that kind of stuff. As you click those buttons, it will actually edit your file. So the chat window is, if you don't have a subscription to Cursor, after you use up your Composer agent experience, you will be doing a lot more of this kind of interaction with it, which works perfectly well. It will not do the amazing stuff we're about to see, that it changes 20 files at once and just tells you to kind of keep clicking buttons to move forward. That's what we're going to really show off. But it does perfectly work well. And over here, it'll kind of describe whatever I just asked about. So you can imagine if you have questions about your project and it dropped something down, you can drop back into Cursor and use it as an LLM rather than, or just like a chat system, rather than thinking of it as only a thing that writes code, because it will actually just answer questions. All right, so with that as an orientation of what we're seeing here, I'm going to close the package file that we had. I'm going to close the terminal window, get a little bit cleaner. We will see code pop up because as Cursor makes changes, it opens the file. So you'll see the file that it's making changes to, but we're not actually going to be in code. We're going to pretty much be in this window on the right. And I want to describe this real briefly. There's 3 tabs up top. The one we're going to be in is the Composer, and the mode that we're going to be in is Agent, and you'll see Ask Agent here. And that's really important. Agent is the one that can take actions across multiple files and create and refactor files for you. It will ask you questions here in this panel, so you'll have to keep your eye on what it's saying because sometimes it'll just pause, but it's actually asking you a question you either need to answer in the chat window below or click a button or something. You'll see a fair bit of that. So the first thing I want to do is just clean up the environment that we have, the system that we have now, and I'm going to describe to the composer what we're building. And we're going to keep it real high level to begin with. But before we do that, I want to show you one thing. I can type at a certain speed here, but that's nothing compared to this next trick I'm about to show you. And this trick is worth its weight in gold. So if you have a Mac, it works on Windows as well. I just don't know the feature set in Windows to enable it. Just ask your local GPT to help you solve this problem. I'm going to open up the settings. So if I go up to the Apple window and go to System Settings, and then come down to the left here and click on Keyboard and go to the bottom of the keyboard settings, you'll see dictation. I would say enable dictation. I will show you what I'm doing. I am setting that to be twice on my globe button. So on my keyboard, I have this function globe key on the bottom left of my laptop keyboard. I'm going to use that. That'll be the thing. I'm going to press it twice. It enables it. Pressing once turns it back off. You can use different control sequences here. If you use your globe key today, I'll note to press once and pull up the emoji picker, which is one of the things that it does. Selecting press twice will remove that. And you'll have to go up to the keyboard system and change that to something else if you want the emoji picker to come up. So pick left command twice or something like that if you like. But this feature is so useful. What we're about to do is so valuable, especially when dealing with something that is so communication intensive, that I highly advise you give this a shot. It will change everything. And what you're going to see is me telling this system what I'm interested in building. Hey Cursor, I want to kind of remove the parts that we have in this application currently. And on the front page, I want something that will be a nav bar at the top with a search kind of input in it with a search button. And what's going to go into that is either a URL for a YouTube channel or just the channel name. So it needs to be able to take either of those in. And when somebody submits that, what we will do is run a function to fetch all of the videos for that channel, and maybe the most recent 50 videos or something like that, and then show them in a grid below. So we'll need some kind of context to be able to keep track of what has been selected and those kinds of things. But I also want this extracted into multiple components, multiple feature parts, not all piled in my page, please. Okay, as you'll note, I'm rather meandering in that, but it's also highly descriptive compared to had I typed this out. And I did say a couple things here. I've built this a few times so that I kind of have a clue on how to lead it, to be fair. Some of these, if you leave it out, we will have to backtrack quite a bit. So I'm trying to prevent a little bit of that backtrack. But getting there, even if you had not said this up front, you would eventually be able to say, no, I want the search bar up top. I want it down below. So not a big deal, but I'm going to kick this off now and we'll watch Cursor. What it's going to start doing is saying, oh, let me look around your files. Let's see what we have so far. I'll make these changes. And on the left, that web browser should start reloading as it starts making changes. It'll reload through some errors. I'm going to wait until what happens on the Cursor side completes to judge whether or not it's complete. So let's take a look. All right, it's still working through stuff. I will mention a few things here while it's working. It's still down here generating. So he's going to help us restructure. He wants to look through. He listed through some of the directories. He also found some rules, and this came from the thing that I checked out, by the way. So I checked out this template, as I keep mentioning. The template comes with this folder up, this .cursor folder. In the .cursor folder, you can have a rules folder, and in there we can have different pieces of logic that kind of prompt the system to do things a certain way, right? So if I go into this one that's talking about how you create routes and components, I've given it some structure that I want you to put certain things in these folders. If I talk about themes and styling, I want you to put things in the chakra style, put it in the theme. Nothing special, but that's what he's mentioning here, that he's breaking out saying, oh, I noticed there's routes and component rule that I need to follow, and he's spitting it out here. based on these requirements, I'll make some changes, and you'll see, oh, I created a component called search bar, and then it found some lint, so it creates things and then checks for errors, fixes those errors, checks again for errors, moves on to the next thing. So you'll see it kind of wander back and forth between these solutions. And it says, okay, let me create the video grid component, so that's something it needs to create. And now let's create the YouTube content. So that's good. Main page, he made big changes to the main page. All right, so this is a ton of changes. We don't want to read through all of it, but he really generally will say at the bottom, when he's completed, he'll come back and say, okay, this is what I've done, looking through the bullet points. And you have the opportunity to just leave it alone. What you're seeing here is this big green is kind of what they call a diff. It's the red is what was removed, green is what was added, essentially. And it's trying to help you understand what parts of a file were edited as it's making changes. And when you accept, it's actually accepting those changes. Those changes are actually already in place. This visual diff is just here to help you. But I will point out that it makes these checkpoints. And you can see it above many of its creations. When it goes and creates a new object, it creates a checkpoint. And you can restore, if you hit the restore button at that point, it will remove all the following changes beyond that. So if you got to a certain point that it felt like, oh, you were pretty good up to here, but then things kind of went wild, you can hit the restore point there and then start typing saying, let's move forward. I think the last one didn't quite work. Okay, so let's see if we put in a URL over here for a YouTube channel. Okay, it says no videos found. That seems very reasonable. The design of this all looks fine. So far, we don't really know because we don't have any videos coming out. So I will accept this and say, all right, well, as far as I can tell, it's good enough. Nothing's breaking at this point. But I'm interested in integrating with the YouTube API, and this is going to take just a bit. So this is going to get technical just a bit, not terrible. You can ask the composer this. I will forego that because it's just a bunch of back and forth. I'll describe to you what I needed to do to get this done. Basically, the YouTube API is something that Google owns, of course, and you need to create a Google account. I will not show any of this. You can then create a project. It's a developer account. Ask ChatGPT. It'll give you fantastic instructions to doing this. It's free. Anybody has access to this. You just need to create a little project in their developer system that says, I'm going to use access to the YouTube API, and then it'll give you a key back. Called an API key. That API key we will put into the system here so that it can use the YouTube API. I will get us close enough to that and then make those changes behind the scenes here in my own environment file. I'll show you that in a second. Super easy. It sounds a lot more than it is, especially since you have the composer here. You have Cursor helping you, but you also can go over to ChatGPT or something else and just say, look, I'm trying to use the YouTube API. I don't know anything about it. Please give me step-by-step instructions. And it will walk you absolutely through every step of it. It's actually much more simple than you think. And you can see that they're even mentioning it here. You'll need to add your YouTube API key to the environment file. But as far as I can tell, let's collapse things. He hasn't created an environment sample. So let me ask him, can you create the environment example file that I can duplicate to an environment local file, please? And he's saying, sure, I'll create the sample file that you can then duplicate. And to describe this .env file, .env files are files that very commonly are not checked into any repositories. They're private. So if you're on a team, you all might share the keys, but you wouldn't check it into a project so that everybody checking out the project has access to your data or something like that. And we use this .env mechanism to store our credentials locally in a development environment or during a build cycle or something like that, so that nobody else has direct access to it. The example file very commonly would be something that would get checked in so that the next person knows, oh, I changed this from .env.example to .env.local. And then it starts using it, and that's the one that'll get used. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my API key in here. You'll see a .env local next to this. Okay, so I duplicated the env example file to the env local file, put my API key in there. Let's just come over here and see if this works. It does. Look at that. Magic. It took that long. And that is as long as it took. All of the prompts that I've done, you've seen. So this is from 0 to this that quickly. Now, admittedly, you probably had to go out to Google and get an API key, that kind of thing. But very, very small compared to that. And this already is starting to look a lot like a system that would be interesting to kind of toy around in. I'm going to actually go a step further than this and create a detail panel for it because that gets a little bit more sophisticated. Let's pull that out and see how it feels to then kind of coax the system through building an extra component on the other side of it. All right, one of the things that I very commonly will do is come into the composer once I get to a place that I feel like we've reached a point of value. I will create a new composer that kind of cleans the context up and I don't have to carry across all of the conversations I've previously been having. That depends. If you've been saying some things that are really meaningful, there's ways to do that. So in other words, if you keep fighting with Cursor and saying, no, every time you do this, you're putting the words in the file. I don't want the words in the file. I want them in an external file. I always want you to put words in an external file. Let's say there's an example of something like that. Or I have a constants file. That's where I want you to keep my variables. And it just keeps not doing that. And you keep having to say that. The method that I would follow to doing something like that is to create a file out here called instructions.md, or even I've done it in a folder, instructions, and we'll move instructions.md into there. And let's rename that guy to constants.md. And then when whatever you want to tell it, always remember to move all variable default definitions into a constants file, right? I'll save that. So at any time that you feel like I really want to be able to, at this moment, reference this, let's say a new something, remember at constants. And that's the way these at signals are the way to say, I have something that I want you to pay attention to. It will use that file up here. You can also hit this plus and do it this way. Looks like Command Option P also does it. But this at is the mechanism to say, I'm going to point at a specific file. You read that file before you do the work. And what it'll do is it'll come in and read this. If you have something that you want it to remember all the time, as you recall, we had these cursor rules. You can just add a new file in here of any format. The format that I've created is not needed. It doesn't have to be Markdown. It just is cleaner for me to look at when it's in Markdown. And create a new file in here that's this constant. So I can drag this constants directly in here. Now, these have a specific file mechanism. So if you look at this, you'll see they're MDC files. And when you go into them, they have their own editor. I'll show you that so that you can see what Cursor is doing. So since it's an MDC, Cursor knows how to present it in this own theming thing. So if you drag a file in here, make it .mdc, it'll show up like this. You'll want to come in and fill in the instructions or the description here and any global kind of file naming matching pattern that you're interested in, or just leaving it blank. But these two, I think, are something that Cursor is really looking for when it uses these files. I don't know if they're necessary, but I think it's the metadata on this file that they care about. And then you can put anything else in here that you want. So that's how you might kind of hone Cursor to doing what you want to do if you keep having to describe something to it and worry about closing the context over here all of the time and getting rid of everything. I just want a clean concept whenever I can, or context whenever I can when I get started. The other thing that I'll very frequently do is click these three dots or right click on one of the tabs and do close all, because it's opening all the files all the time. And to me, I just kind of, if anything, want to be able to see the files that it made changes to in one run. And keeping those two clean help me understand the context of all the changes that are being made in any one big shift. I'll show you one more trick. If you've used the system, that NPX system at the beginning to get started that I showed you, you will also have a repository at this point. And at this point, I can say a good beginning and commit. And now I have a checkpoint that I can move back to in a Git flow. So if the next thing I do really blows everything away, Cursor can do that. It can get so freaked out and do things that it doesn't seem to really destroy files in my experience, but it certainly will get to a place that it circularly can't solve its own problem. And you, unless you fully understand what's been laying down, may get to a place of saying, well, okay, I guess this project's broken. I need to walk away. Use this control concept, go in source control and check in your files periodically, just with a simple little timestamp saying, hey, at this moment, I'm kind of okay coming back to this. If you remember to do that, I guarantee you there will be a day that you use it and you'll thank me. So, all right, enough of that. Now we're back to this. I want to now add this new side panel, a detail panel that I kind of just want to show up on the side of the panel over here when something is selected. Let's see if we can talk it into that. Okay, Cursor, you've been doing great so far. I am interested when there are videos on the list, I want to be able to select a tile. When I select a tile, I kind of want it to have an outline with our brand color, and I want to create a new detail panel that comes up to the right of the grid. So essentially takes up the right portion of the screen whenever there's a selected video. In there, I kind of want the standard properties that you would expect in a YouTube video detail page. So kind of some kind of screenshot image and then description of duration and likes and the date that it was released, its title, a long description. And that long description, by the way, is going to be special. It comes out as plain text, and the new lines need to be broken from an HTML standpoint so that they look like new lines. And there's also URLs that need to be matched or linked within that segment. So that one's a little bit more complicated, but I also would love a play at YouTube or launch YouTube or something like that button so that we could go play the video. All right, so as you can tell, this idea of just being able to talk and meander through your talking, if you've talked enough to GPTs at this point, you understand they're very good at condensing what you're trying to say into its core properties before it tries to answer. So it gets past all of this rethink, double back, all this other stuff. So doing it this way is 1,000 times better than when I was typing. Let's see what this thing comes up with. Understand the current code base, create a video selection, add selection styling, create a new video detail component for the right panel, handle the description text formatting with URL detection. Let me start by checking the existing code structure, search a code base. You'll notice that it says, oh, I've got some styles and themes that matter. So it's taking those into consideration. Also, let me check routes and component rules. Oh, so it needs to pay attention to that based on the code base structure and requirements. Implement the video selection detail panel. So it's going through here, making changes to the YouTube context itself, which is great. All right, changing the grid, and then its output of the changes that it made. Okay, so it has finished. Great. So all of the changes that it made are up here. Let's take a look. YouTube context, video grid, and video detail. And these things are still dropping into my features folder as I described to it, which all looking really great so far. I would need to dive into the code to really understand how cleanly it's following my instructions, but sounds reasonable. Let me come over here, paste in our channel name, do a search. Okay, that seems like where we were. Let's see if I can select one of these. It fills in a panel. Okay, that's pretty good. I think the description's not quite working, but it's looking good. And I happen to understand a little bit about the YouTube API at this point, having built this a bunch of times. Let me prompt him to try to get to these changes without telling him explicitly the problem. So this might be the thing you come across. Let's see if we can answer it the way that makes the most sense. At the same time, I'll just accept everything just to get rid of all of the different markups to know the changes here going forward will be the green ones, not the ones from the last run. Okay. Okay, that's getting actually very good. I'm not seeing the details that I would expect from this detail panel. It feels like maybe the results have very little information. I don't see a meaningful description. I'm not getting any of the number of likes or views or that kind of information. So maybe there's a way to get deeper details for this selected video. And I said I wasn't going to do that. That's kind of the trick, is there's another endpoint that they need to call, another call when the details are selected. But so I gave it the maybe there's deeper details. I see the issue. Looking at the context in the API response, we're not fetching the detailed video information when the video is selected. And that's the trick. He has solved that every time on his own anyway, but just in case you run into this, if you're trying to follow along, I happen to know the answer because I've run into this enough times, not because I've looked into the API. In fact, I really love the fact that I don't know the API, but I can actually functionally build something out of it. Create the API endpoint to fetch detailed video information, creating that. So here's a good example of Cursor coming back saying, I need to do something. I need to install some things. So he needs to install something from Google APIs, and he needs my okay to do it. He's not moving forward with it. He's waiting for me to run this. He's stuck in generating, waiting for this command to complete, but I need to hit run command. And so this is important. I'm pretty much aware that the types file, it doesn't need to get this. In fact, it'll throw an error. So this is a good example of watching it actually run a command that fails from like a terminal standpoint. It reads the result of that and then self-corrects. It's kind of cool. Let's just install the Google APIs package as it includes its own types. And then I have to run it again. That one worked. So I think that's really kind of neat. This is the idea of, and it's an agent with a human in the loop, right? So it's running this agent system of multi-step solving a problem. It creates a plan first, then goes and solves the problem, but also watches each one of those steps to determine whether or not it needs a human to make certain actions. I think that's great. It's great design. I think it makes it extremely extensible as they go forward. And frankly, other than it's a little difficult to tell when I need to interact with it, sometimes I get lost waiting for it to complete, but it actually has a very small message. In fact, it'll even ask a question in its normal text sometimes and not take the action that it describes. So it describes this big, huge action and then just says something at the bottom, and I'm supposed to type a yes or no, or I'm okay with that in the text field. Those get lost. It's very difficult for me to understand that that's what it's waiting for. Another thing that I've noticed, I use Claude 3.5 Sonnet still to do this. I find Sonnet does a really good job of code development without the wordiness, but it gets lost every now and then. I think we might be in one of those places where it is trying to build something. It's trying to take a step. And for whatever reason, whether it's part of the interaction with the LLM or part of the cursor layer or something, it's stuck. It looks like it's working, but it gets stuck. What I found, you can interrupt it and make it to tell it to continue, and it'll be just fine. It almost never gets stuck in a way that it can't fix itself. So don't wait too long. If it's sitting there generating, that's actually probably not the LLM. If it's 30 seconds, it's way too long. Now, of course, if you're using a model that's a thinking model or something like that, your times will vary. But on these smaller, faster models, they really return very quickly. So I had to interrupt this, and I'm going to say continue. And I don't know how visible it is on the video. There's 3 tiny little dots here that shows that it's thinking. And that's my indicator that it's kind of trying to move forward, but it gets stuck in this place from time to time as well. In fact, there have been enough times with Cursor that it has gotten entirely stuck that even hitting stop and canceling this doesn't work. And I then have to close Cursor and reopen it for it to interrupt itself appropriately to get started again. In fact, I think we're in one of those places. So let's show that process and show what I end up doing in this case. All right. So now we have Cursor running again, nothing's executing. It's worth understanding that our server now is not running either. So if I reload over here, we don't have our server running. It's just be aware when we run our server inside of Cursor, if you close Cursor, if you cancel it, it closes the server also, which is valuable, but at the same time may be confusing why it's not running. So you might need to come back down here and do your run dev again. All right. And then I will tell him to continue, and it feels like he thinks he's complete at this point. Great, excellent. I'm going to accept. Let's go take a look. All right. So it definitely has more of the information. Wow, we have some styling problems here. That's good. That's something that we need to look into. That's kind of enormously ginormous as a requirement. That's better. Maybe that's it. Let's restart. Maybe it's just not good at resizing. Nope, it's just got some challenges. That's fine. But so that's one of those things you might go back and forth with, saying, okay, wait a second, I noticed the panel gets really big. I I need it to never be more than 50% or whatever else. And Cursor's very good at that kind of cleanup because we feel like we're at a place that kind of has what we want. And I will again follow along and say close everything. This is looking really good. The detail panel comes up very wide sometimes and is not entirely responsive. It does change sizes, but not as gracefully as I'd like. Can you work on that? So he's checking implementation, style-related rules. He goes and finds my note about styles and theming, made several changes. Just to give him a chance, I'm going to reload again and restart, picking that. So that one does look good. Pick a second one. It kind of blows up. Oh, I know what it must be doing. It must be doing something with the size of the image. Maybe it has something to do with the size of the screenshot image that's being laid down. Maybe that's not being constrained to the size of the panel because it looks like on some of these, it gets very wide when there's a bigger image. So as you can see, just this back and forth is super pleasant and it really is working at this point. This is actually doing what we want it to do. Last reminder, super easy, so simple. We're happy with where it sits, right? What are we supposed to do? We come out and hit this cute little source icon up here and say, commit, at least I have a checkpoint. That's a place to go back to. All right. So that was excellent. I had a lot of fun. I hope you had fun as well. This was a quick little exercise, maybe not entirely quick little exercise to just get us to the point that we can build a semi-sophisticated application. Now you have something to play with. If you wanted to mess around with the way YouTube content goes, feel free to throw other utilities in here, whatever else you might need it to do. I found this one enjoyable. I will continue to do these kinds of things. If you have ideas for other editors that maybe I can try out or other projects that we might have fun taking on, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for coming along on the ride with this one, and I'll see you in the next one.